All right, today is Monday, the 31st of August. What I gave you are two iterations of a payroll program. The actual second one that I gave you, that iteration 01, is very similar to the program we did as a class. All right. Now, if you look up here, though, there's a lot of information. There's a lot of stuff up here that's in green. Since it's in green, that means those are comments. They're not part of the program. What I've tried to show you is, especially when you start the program, if you're having a hard time getting going, what you might want to do is you might want to write pseudocode, which is actually down here. All right, and this is kind of a defining diagram up here. And what it shows are all the inputs we're going to have to the program, all the outputs we're going to get from the program, and the processing that has to be done to convert the inputs to the outputs. So as you can see, looks like there's something missing there that should say first name, but it doesn't. But the inputs, first name, last name, hours worked, and hourly rate. Outputs are the same thing. All right? Now, that you might look at that, and that might not make a lot of sense. What I want to make sense to you is this right here. What you see in green here, this is pseudocode. All right? This first example that I gave you, it's a very contrived example. And what I mean by that is if you run the first program, the one that says 00 on it, if you run that 1,000,000 times, you always get the same answer. That doesn't help very much when you're trying to program. That's not the idea behind trying to program. But I put that one out there just so people, again, would become familiar with the syntax. All right? So what I've done is I've created variables, but I set the first one, I just set it to me. All right, so the first name is Jeff, the last name is Scott, the hours worked is 40, the hourly rate is 25, and the gross pay is going to be 40 times 25. In other words, it's going to be 1,000. All right? Now take a look at what's up on the screen right here. A couple things. First of all, as we get going and as programs get more complex, you'll have more than one function. Again, ideally, a function is a unit that does one thing. You give it some kind of a name that's at least somewhat reflective of what it's supposed to be doing. All right, so you might turn around and go, well, then why'd you call it main? All right, and I will just tell you that many programming languages like Java and C and C++ and C#, they expect there to be a main. That's kind of the point of entry into the program. That's why I call this main, but by no means did it have to be called main. All right. Remember the syntax when you're working with, and the syntax means the rules of the language when you're working with JavaScript. Any function has to start with the name, with the word function. It's a key word, so anything that you see in here that's blue, those are keywords. So they have a specific meaning to the system. You have to use them in that way. You can't create your own variable that's called function. It wouldn't make any sense to the system. You can't create your own variable that's named var. You can't do that. All right. But since this is a case-sensitive language, you could make a variable called function with a capital F. That would be silly to do, but you could do it, and the system would not complain. All right. So remember, function main, that begins our function. JavaScript is a block-structured language. So everything that you do goes within curly braces. All right. And as you can see in here, we've got 5 right here. We've got 5 variables in the program. 4 of those variables have been preset for us. You could say, well, really all 5 of them have. But the first name has been set, the last name has been set, the hours worked has been set, the hourly pay has been set. Now, even though I did this in 2 lines, right there, we could have just as easily said var gross pay equals hourly pay times hours worked. We wouldn't have had to put that over 2 lines. All right, I just did it to show you that you can. Sometimes you want to go and just give it a variable a default value and then set it down below. All right, and then all we're doing is we're printing out that information. So again, if I do run this, not like that, I guess. Oh, yeah, I'd have to put it in the runner or in JSBin. So if I do run this, every single time that I run it, oh, why am I not getting output? I don't think there was any errors in it. Boy, oh boy. All right, we'll do this. I'll just, right in front of your very eyes, I'll whip up a very fast little HTML file and we'll run it in there. Well, doesn't like something that's in the program, so let's go take a look at the program. Oh, I know what the problem is. It doesn't know what you, okay. Boy, oh boy. Let's see. It's payroll iteration 00.js. Wow, what a great beginning. It's payroll dash iteration. There we go. Don't know why that's printing out looking that funky, but it is. All right. So if I run this program 1,000 times, I'm always going to get that same output because I have set the inputs up. I have literally set them up so that every single time I have hard-coded in the values for first name, for last name, for pay rate, and for hours worked. That doesn't mean that if I didn't want to, or if I wanted to, I could go back in here and I could change those values. In other words, I could set them up so that we could reset them, all right? But right now, the way this program is run, first name has been set, last name has been set, hours worked has been set, hourly pay has been set, and even gross pay has been set. So every time I run the program, I'm gonna get the exact same output. Does that make sense to people? All right. All right. The only other thing that we really didn't talk much about last time, I don't think, is this right here. And hopefully what that does makes sense to you. It's down here in the bottom. This says whatever I get for a gross pay, set it to fixed 2 decimal places, because that's normally the way we have it, dollars and cents, right? All right, so that automatically, so if it's, for example, if it would come out and it would be like 0.393, it would just remove this, and it would become 0.39. But if it was 0.395 or above, it would change it to 0.40. So it'll automatically go in, and as needed, it will go in and either truncate or round up or down. Okay? All right. Let's look at the next one. This is almost the same thing, except what we're doing now is we're allowing the user the opportunity to enter their first name, to enter their last name, to enter their pay rate, and to enter their hours worked. So this is the second one that I gave you, and it's called Payroll Iteration 01. So let's look at what's different in this one. First of all, for first name, well, for everything that's in here, other than gross pay, Now we're just giving these variables default values. When you put double quote with nothing in between it, that's known as the empty string. And in JavaScript, you can either use double quote, or single quote, single quote. JavaScript doesn't care if you use single quotes or double quotes, but it must be 2 single quotes or 2 double quotes. You can't mix them. All right. So we're doing the same thing for first name and last name. Hours worked and hourly rate we're setting to 0, and gross pay we're setting to 0. This looks at, you've done this before. This is the exact same thing that we did in class last week. So first name equal prompt. Please enter your first name and then please enter your last name. Hopefully all that stuff makes sense. What's new in here is this. You did a prompt before, all right? But what this says is attempt to take whatever I put in there and convert it into a float. And a float is a number that can potentially have a decimal point in it. All right? So if I go ahead and put in there, 13.23, it's going to take that. If I put if I put hello in there, it's not going to take it. So if I put a valid number in there, or whatever JavaScript considers to be a valid number for either one of these, so again, for hourly rate, if I put in 13.25, then that becomes my hourly rate. All right? But if I put in there, let's say I fat fingered, I put the letter A in there first, 13.25. The system sees that A and it just immediately poops out because it doesn't know what to do. It can't convert that letter A into a number, so it gives you, we talked about that last time, stands for not a number. All right? Now, one thing that JavaScript does that most languages don't do, if I accidentally goof it up and do it like this, if I put in 13.25, then I put an A in there, in most programming languages, the program will blow up. It's looking for digits or a decimal place, and it finds a letter. But what JavaScript does is it says, okay. Oh, that's wrong. So it just throws the rest away. All right? So if I did put it in like that, it would take that as the hourly rate. All right? If I leave it blank, it doesn't know how to handle that either. So blank technically becomes NaN, not a number. All right? So it's looking for something in here that's actually a number. We haven't gotten to that point yet, but you would say, well, what about a negative number? The way that this program is written, it'll take negative numbers for either one of those values. So if I put in a negative number for either hours worked or hourly rate, I'm going to have a negative gross pay, which is silly, but you get the idea. When we go on in here, we're going to talk about using an if statement to make sure that you've got some kind of a minimal value for each one of these. All right? But again, if I run that, so then if I say my hours worked, if I say 40, it'll handle that fine. And that'll be my hours worked. So I'll run it and I'll put those two values in there. And I don't know what that is. It's probably about $530. But now I've got to go into my index file here. Instead of running payroll iteration 00, I've got to run iteration 01. And it says enter your first name, enter your last name. All right, and just to show you this, again, we'll run it a few times, but I'll put 1325, and I'll put 40, and it says, Jeff Scott, 1325, 40, 530. That all works the way that you would expect it to work. If I run it again, and really, it doesn't matter if I put in a first name or not, but as I said, if I put in A 13.25, and then 40, notice what I get, NaN. All right? It still says that the hours worked is okay, and the reason that I get NaN for the gross pay is it tries to multiply a non-number by 40, and the value is non-number. All right? And technically it would have been, I actually could have set it up so that I left it, let's just leave all this blank. So in fact, I'll leave it at pay rate, and at hours worked. And notice I get NaN for everything. The reason I wanted to show you that is when you start writing code, all right, you're going to get your first assignment either at the end of this week or sometime next week. And you'll have at least an entire, we'll do part of it as a class, and the rest of it, you'll be assigned to do, and you'll have class time to work on it. But it's always important that you go, and sometimes people, they mistakenly think that, well, the program ran, so it must be okay. All right. In here, technically, this program is wrong because it allows for bad values and it doesn't check for bad values. Does all that make sense? All right. Because right from the get-go, we're going to be going over, we've gone over the first 3 chapters in the book, and in just a minute, we're going to go over Chapter 4, which is on variables. And then we're going to go over Chapter 5, which is on operators and expressions. And that'll get us to about the break. And then after the break, I'm going to give you a couple more handouts. And we're going to go over those. And then if there's time, we're going to go over 6 and 7. Whatever we don't finish from 6 and 7, today we'll finish up on Wednesday. All right? And there's a good chance Wednesday I'll have your first assignment for you. There'll probably be like about 4 problems. And the first 2 we'll do as a class, so you can see exactly what I'm looking for. All right, and then the other 2 will be your responsibility. And if we get all that done on Wednesday, then all of next week will be lab. All right, and if I'm going to assign them Wednesday, they'll be due 2 weeks from Wednesday. All right. Questions on that? All right, let's jump back into the book then. And again, we've gone over the first 3 chapters, to my knowledge at least we have. So I'm going to go right to page 41, and we're going to start talking about variable types. And I've said this kind of thing to you before, and I want to say it again, and that is, please don't think, well, I'm going to be really good at this because I'm good at memorizing. This is not the kind of field where memorization is going to buy you a whole lot. To memorize something is fine, but you have to be able to put it into practice and show that you know how to use it. That's much more important. All right, so again, I'm on page 41, working with variables and data types. Understand the primitive data types used in JavaScript. We're going to talk about those first. Primitive data types. Primitive data types, I may have mentioned this last week, they're also known as scalar, S-C-A-L-A-R data types. They can only hold one value at a time. That's what a scalar data type is. Later on, we'll talk about things like arrays and a few other things which are not they're not scalar data types. They're known as data structures, and they can hold multiple things at the same time. We won't get into that for a bit. All right. They talk about it in here, so we'll start looking at it, but I'm purposely going to make sure when we get to the first set of assignments, we're only going through chapters 1 through 7. Chapter 8 in here is on objects. And we're going to talk about objects as a class, but I'm not going to give you any homework on that because it's real easy to get very confused once you get into that stuff. All right, and if we're 3 or 4 weeks into a class, it's not my goal here just to try to confuse you. All right. We'll talk about variable scope and a little bit about using Firebug. Okay. All right. Notice in here, if you look on the bottom of page 41, it says the 6 data types in JavaScript discussed in this chapter are the ones shown. There are other programming languages, not JavaScript, but other ones that don't have a number data type like this. They have several number types. For instance, they might have a type int, which means it has to be a whole number. All right, they might have a short int and a long int for smaller values that you can use for an int. They might have floats and they might have doubles, etc. For what we're doing in here, JavaScript rather, handles all numbers, whether they have a decimal place or don't have a decimal place, by calling them numbers. All right. Strings are anything that occurs within either single quotes or double quotes. All right. Booleans are values that have true or false. All right, so again, you might have a value like union, married. All right, something like that that's true or false. Null is unknown. We've talked about this before. Undefined is if you try to print out something that you have not yet assigned. And we'll just start to broach or get into the idea of objects a little bit later. All right, they mentioned number strings and Booleans. They exist in any language, and most people can catch onto them fairly quickly. Null, undefined, and objects are a little bit more complex, so they talk about them later on in the chapter. All right. I do want to mention, I showed you this example before, and everything I told you was true. So again, if I come in and I have a prompt box and I say enter a value for your hourly rate, you put this in. It converts it to NAN, not a number. If I put this in, it takes it okay, and it makes it 40. But you cannot do this. You can't say var x equals 137.25a. That won't work, even if you put a semicolon on the end. When you're declaring a variable, that won't work because it says, oh, it's not in double quotes, or it's not in single quotes, so it must be a number. Okay, it's a number, 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 okay, it's a number. What the heck is that? And it doesn't understand what that is. So it just stops. And unfortunately, in this language, most often when you run a program like that, all that happens is you get absolutely no output. Nothing happens. That's when you can go in, and they talk about this at the end of the chapter, you can go in and start debugging it. All right. All right, they also do talk about this, and I mentioned it to you before. They talk about hexadecimal math. One of the courses that you're supposed to take if you're a full-time student in this program in your first semester is the math and logic class. Now, some of you might be in that class. I don't know. But really, everyone who's in this class should take that class. Now, if people say to me, well, I want to, but I only have time to take one class, I understand that. But you should take that class as early into the program as you can. Because what that class is designed to do, and Julie Bellman does just a fantastic job with it, it's to try to make you think like the computer thinks. And you might think, well, I'm not that smart. No, the computer's not smart. Right? Most computers have the intellect, they've done studies on this. Most computers have the intellect of an 18-month-old child. They understand only a certain number of commands. All right? You always have the ultimate power over them. You can unplug it. So, well, what if I'm on battery? Yeah, but you can just keep pressing it till you turn it off. All right? They don't yet have the ability that I know of to turn you off. All right? But one of the things that Julie discusses in there are different number systems. So not just base 10 like we use, which is the decimal number system, but she talks about base 8, which is called the octal number system. And she talks about hexadecimal, which is base 16 number system. So I'm not going to go over that. If you're interested, you can take a look at what's in there, okay? All right. JavaScript has a lot of built-in numeric functions. We've already looked at one, NaN, not a number. It says you can also use another JavaScript function called isNaN to check to see whether or not a number is valid or it is not valid. So in other words, I could have come in, and we'll do this in later programs, but I just want to show you this. I could have come in here once we said this, and I could have come in and said, if not is NaN hourly rate. And what that means in English is if you put something non-numeric in for hourly rate. So I could come up here with an alert statement. Okay, and I could say non-numeric value entered for hourly rate setting to 10. I just made that number up. It's like a default value that I put in there. All right, so if I come back in and I run this again, again, we don't care about the first name or the last name, but now notice if I leave this, all right. So let's look at what went wrong. I know what it went wrong. In the check, I put if not is not a number. And what I should have put in here is that. Okay? That means if it's not a number. Right there. Does that make sense? But I put an exclamation point in front of it which said not a number. So that meant if it was a number, do it. So I reversed my check from the way it should have been. So let's save this and try to run it again and see if I did it right this time. All right, and we'll put in valid values. And I'm going to put in here A, B, C, D, E. Notice non-numeric value found, setting it to 10. All right, so now that I've done that, and I'll set the hours worked to 40, and notice, but when you say you're going to set it to 10, you have to set it to 10. All right, so the next line should have been hourly rate equal 10. And you probably don't believe this, but when I make these mistakes, I love making these mistakes because that's what you're going to do. Everybody does it. All right. So I said here, non-numeric setting to 10, but I didn't set it. So now I've set it. Now I've gone and reset it to 10. Now if I run this, thanks, John, and I run the program, I'll just leave this blank. We'll put pay rate. That's fine. Now setting to 10. And I'll put in a 40. Make me a layer again. Hourly rate equal 10. It's not a number. Let's do this. Let's put an alert in here and say hourly rate equals hourly rate. All right, see if it's being reset. All right, it says it's resetting it to 10. Hourly rate is 10. Right there it says it is. And for some reason now it works. All right. Now, what I've started to show you right there, not very well, but what I started to show you right there, and I want you to wrap yourself around this. This is the beginning of you learning what's called data input validation. You want to make sure the person is putting something in there. So I could put something similar to this. And I could say if it's not hourly rate, hours worked, all right, then I could say non-numeric value set for hours worked, and I'll set the default there to 40.
Change the hours worked to 40.
Thank you. Well, it would have given me 100, but that's fine. You're both correct. All right. Okay. Looks like it was reset. Looks like it was reset. Okay? So that's data input validation. You're going to have to learn that quick. It may not sound that important there, but where it becomes really important, and we'll get to this soon enough, is when you start to create an HTML form. And that HTML form has a submit button on it. You put in all your information, you click the submit button. If you left the field off, there's no sense, if that field is required, there's no sense going and taking that form and sending it out to a server someplace so the server can look at it and say you didn't fill it all out completely and send it back to you. That's a waste of server resources. So what you'll see when we start to create HTML forms is you will validate it on what's called the client side, and you do that using JavaScript. All right. Then if all your stuff succeeds, then you'll send it over to the server. All right. All right. So not the way exactly I planned to show it to you, but I did show you the is not a number function. Notice that JavaScript has some built-in numeric constants. You probably won't use these very often. Infinity, which it means just that. When you put them in, you have to put them in like this. number with a capital N and a lowercase here, and this has to be an uppercase with the underscore there. All right, so if for some reason you wanted to show the largest number you could represent in JavaScript, you could print that out. If you wanted to show the smallest number you could possibly show in JavaScript, you could print that out. All right, I don't know what those values are. They're pretty big or pretty small. JavaScript has a built-in thing called a math object. All right, and you see this here. In fact, I'm going to grab that line of code, and I'm going to just throw it into the program here. We don't need it, but just to show it to you. All right, and after we print all this stuff out, we'll put another alert in here, and we'll say the value of pi is math.pi. Again, it would have really no sense at all in this program, but just to show it to you. There's all that stuff, the value of pi is, and you can see how many decimal places it goes out to. That's not what's important. What is important here is the fact, and this is what I want you to get out of this. I'm going to hit enter a few times so I can move this up. What this is doing, this line right here, this says there is something special built into JavaScript that's basically, for lack of better words, it's called the math class. The math class has a bunch of stuff in it that you can use in your program. All right, you can automatically use it. One of those things is it provides the value of pi for your program. But in order to use it, you can't just say pi, you say math.pi. All right, you're going to see a bunch of these. We're going to run through a bunch of them, and it won't be in too long a time. So we'll talk about things like square root, the square of a number, rounding of numbers, etc. All right, and I wanted to show you something. I meant to talk about this last week, but I wanted to show you something else. I know some of you take very great notes and stuff in here. Some don't. Some people remember stuff, some don't. But I wanted to show you this site, and literally it's a very ugly site, but it's called hunlock.com, and I don't know how I found it, but I was just working one day and I happened to be pushed to that site. All right, and ever since then I've used it quite a bit and shown it to quite a few people. So that's it. So those of you who say you can't read small text, hopefully that's big enough that you can read it. All right, so it's hunlock.com. You don't even need the http://. You can just type in hunlock.com, hunlock.com. What's nice about it is, notice what it says in here, Essential JavaScript, a JavaScript tutorial. So you click on there, and it runs through this pretty long tutorial of all sorts of stuff, some of which we've gone over already, some of which we have not yet gone over. But then as you start going through it, you'll notice, oh, JavaScript numbers. So one of the things that it shows in here, there's your arithmetic operators, there's your bitwise operators. You don't really have to worry about those. There's your max values, etc. There's some of the stuff you can use, but they've got all sorts of different built-in things that exist in here and examples of how to use them. The other site that's really good, and I know I've mentioned this one to you before, and that's w3schools.com/JS. All right, and that's got a JavaScript tutorial in it. All right. So again, that one is here. Everyone learns differently. One thing that's nice about a site like W3 Schools is they give you some code. They just show you code and they go click this button that's called Get Result. And then they show you by running that code what your result would be. So if that helps you learn it, if for some reason I'm not getting across to you, well then that's on me. You have to let me know. But take a look at those two sites because those will get you going. There's a lot of other ones also. Those are two of the better ones that I've found, at least. This is known as dot notation. They talk about that right here. Math.pi. That's the way you literally read that. All right. And here's some of the other stuff you can use from the math object. Math.random to create a random number. Now, if you said, well, okay, I get it. Okay, so you use math.random. What if I wanted to generate a random number between 1 and 100? Let's just say we wanted to do that. Then I'd come in here and I would Google, and I would say JavaScript random number between 1 and 100. And when you do that, one of the first links that will typically come up is a place called stackoverflow.com. That's a site for professional developers. You can go out there. You don't want to post questions if you're a newbie, because people will write on there, this site is for people who have a clue as to what they're talking about. And they'll write stuff like that, if not meaner than that. All right? But if I go out there, somebody will say, hey, how do I create the random number? And there it is. But that's between 1 and 6. So if I wanted it between 1 and 100, all right, I would just change that 6 to 100. If I wanted a number that was 0 or 1, I would just change that to a 1. Does that make sense? All right. The absolute value, if you've never used that, so if I say to Roger here, if I say, how old are you? Roger says, I'm 40. All right, well, I'm 58. So there's 18 years between us, and it doesn't really matter if you say 58 minus 40 or 40 minus 58. There's still 18 years between us. So when you have calculations like that where negative doesn't make any sense, you typically use absolute value. All right. Power, if you want to raise something to a power. So if I said math.pow and I put in there 3 comma 2, that would be 3 squared or 9. All right. Math.round, I kind of showed you some examples of that before. So you can force rounding to take place. All right. So that's most of your numeric stuff. How about strings? Again, they're showing you single or double quotes here, but as they show down here, they can be single quotes. What if for some reason I wanted to put a string and I wanted that string to say I like cake, he said. All right, and I wanted that to be in double quotes here and here. All right, then I could say var str for string equals single quote I like cake, and then put a double quote here, comma, he said, single quote. So you see that? My single quotes are here, my double quotes are here. Does that make sense to you? All right, again, when you do it a few times, it makes more sense. But if you turn around and you go, you know what? I want to use 2 sets of double quotes. All right, you can't do this. You can't say var str equals double quote, I like cake, double quote, comma, he said. That doesn't make any sense to the system. But what I can do, so that's no. But I can say var str equals double quote, then backslash double quote, I like cake, cake, backslash double quote, he said, double quote, semicolon. What the backslash does is it says, okay, turn off any special meaning of the character that follows. All right, so this says right here, that will literally print like this now. Yeah. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do this. The 2 that you're going to use most often are, if you want to turn off a double quote, backslash n is a new line, that's like you hit the enter key, and backslash t, that's as though you hit the tab key. Those are called escape sequences. Those are the ones you're going to use this semester at least almost exclusively. And they show you these on the bottom here of page 47. All right, they give you some examples. I just gave you one. All right, one of those things about, just so you see this, if you don't look up here for a second, in that site that I showed you, And then Hunlock is, I know they've got a thing in here too, and I'm sure they do in W3 schools as well, JavaScript strings. All right, so if I go down far enough, those are all the different methods that you can use with a string. All right, hi. Give me about 2 minutes, okay?
No, that's fine.
All right. So these are all different things that you're able to use, okay? All right, let's finish up this chapter quickly. Booleans we've talked about again. Boolean is true or false. Anytime you write a condition like this, and that if really should have a lowercase I, but anything you put in parentheses like that, after an if, or when we get into it, after a while, or a do while, or a for, that is called a Boolean condition. So it has to come down, it has to be true or false. The system doesn't know any gray area in there. It has to be one or the other. Null, we already mentioned, is unknown, and undefined is a variable that doesn't yet contain a value. I'm going to skip the object stuff and the array stuff for right now. We are going to go through it. You have to take my word for it. Get used to using the word var, even though you don't have to, because it's a good idea. All right. Let's see. We'll talk about scope, and we're going to do that after we get done with the break. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to stop a little early because we have a representative of Blackhawk here who wants to talk to you about Blackhawk, what is it, scholarships and the like. Okay, go ahead.
Do you mind
Elizabeth.
if I log onto my account?
No,
Okay.
but just let me get off of here,
No,
and then
that's fine. I have to pass some stuff
All right,
out.
this is Elizabeth. It's Horvath, right?
Yes.
Okay.